Want me to wait?
1 second.
All right.
Just a reminder to everyone, the mics will be on periodically, so just avoid to loud of a chatter, so nothing gets picked up on the mics or anything.
I have good aim. Yep, so.
Right, should be good to go. And just
All right.
let board members remember to turn on your mics when you're ready to speak.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, well, welcome everybody to this planning board meeting, Wednesday, July 19th, 2023. First item on our agenda is a roll call, and this is really cool because this is the first time in a long time that we've all been behind the bench here. So I can do that this time. We have Ashley Case, we've got Lisa Buck, we've got myself, Phil Ruck, we've got Michael Costello, we got John Beckett, we got Bob Bear, we got Krista Schwintzer down at the end. Lovely to see you in person, Krista. And this evening, Judd will not be with us. So next up is acceptance of the agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Very good, thank you.
Second.
Very good. Any comments? Edits? I guess seeing none. Remind me again, so with everybody here, yeah, you're gonna ask still, or do it, we just, oh, there we go. Yeah, I'm rusty with it. All right, so yeah, all those in favor?
Oh, Mr. Bennett, can you lean forward? Thank you.
There we go. All right. And any opposed? None. So I think everybody voted in favor. Good to go. All right, next up, approval of the minutes of May 17th, 2023. I wasn't at that meeting, nor was Ashley, so we can't vote, but we can provide edits. And I don't have any. So can I get a motion first?
So moved.
Very good. Can I have a second?
Second.
Any edits? No comments, no edits from anybody? Perfection by Jessica. Wow.
As usual.
All right, all those in, well, one. All right,
One edit, it says Mr. Mackinoth. On page 3, under second, it says John Beckett and then Mr. Mackinoth.
okay. Sorry, Jessica. Yes, close, yes, close. All right, any others? All right, all those in favor of the amended minutes? Oh, you can't, vote. Yeah.
Hands up.
You got enough?
That's 5 with 2 abstaining.
Very good. Next up, new business. We have 2 public hearings this evening. First up is a site plan review application by Orono Solar LLC located on 90 Kelly Road, tax map 30, lot 14 in the Economic Development Zone District. The application proposes to develop a 12-acre commercial solar energy system located in the rear of the lot behind the existing Boy Scouts of America building. Could I have a representative, the applicant, step up and tell us what you propose, please?
Good evening. I'm Sean Thies with Haley Ward Engineers representing the applicant. I believe the applicant may be joining via Zoom to the meeting.
Did we check on that, or is that?
He's here.
He's here. Okay. So this is a proposed 12-acre, approximately, I think it's a 1.99 megawatt solar project on property that's currently owned by the Boy Scouts. So this is vacant land out behind their existing facility off Kelly Road. The solar array itself is approximately 12 acres, planning to clear approximately 17 acres for the project. Access would be through the existing driveway into the Boy Scout facility. A gravel road would extend beyond that into the site. The array area is inside a chain link fence, 8-foot tall fence, I believe. There's no lighting proposed. The only noise, there's a sort of somewhat in the middle of the array area, there's a equipment pad area. So that's a concrete pad with transformer inverters on it. Similar to a roadside transformer, you could hear a slight hum if you're up close to it, but where this is located quite a bit a ways from any houses or things like that, there would be no noise impacts on anybody. The majority of the site, even though we're clearing beyond the fence, there's still going to be a wooded buffer for any sort of visual impacts from neighbors. Again, where this is located, there's a few houses up along Kelly Road, but beyond that, the backside of the site is just wooded. A lot of the eastern portion is wooded, and then of course Interstate 95 is on the western portion of the site. There'll be a overhead interconnection where it comes out along the Boy Scout driveway and then ties in at Kelly Road. They're proposing a tracker system. So solar, there's usually two options. It's either a fixed tilt system where the panels are fixed and they don't move. This one is a tracker system. So as the sun moves across the sky, the panels move with the sun to maximize the energy output. It's pretty straightforward. Obviously, there's no water sewer use. Once it's constructed, as far as traffic, there might be somebody once a month that goes to the site to check on things for maintenance type issues. It's currently wooded. That will obviously be cleared. Inside the fence will be grubbed and it'll be seeded over. So it's maintained as a meadow surface per DEP requirements. That's limited to mowing no more than 2 times per year. So it's still essentially the entire area is considered like a meadow buffer, if you will, for stormwater. Other than that, we submitted a stormwater permit by rule for clearing over 1 acre of land. There's a small amount of wetland impact where we have to cross through the wetland coming in with the access road. That's under the 4,300 square foot exemption for needing a full wetland permit. So we don't have to necessarily permit that. We just report that to DEP and Army Corps. Beyond that, I guess I would open it up to questions that the board may have.
Very good. I'm going to ask first if Kyle, if you have anything to add to that summary.
Yeah, sure. I can just touch on a few things in relation more to our land use ordinance. So from a use standpoint, this would be a large scale solar energy system. Remember, it was a couple of years ago now that we amended the ordinance to include a specific land use for solar projects when we first started hearing more interest in developers for this sort of thing, specifically for the larger scale kind of commercial projects. With this site being in our economic development zone, that's, as I mentioned in the report, that's one of the zones where group developments are an allowed activity, which allows for multiple principal uses to take place simultaneously on a single lot. You know, typically you could only have, let's say you were in a residential district or something like that, and you already had a use like the Boy Scouts building on the site. That would sort of be the only principal use allowed on the site. But in some of our, bigger commercial districts, this group development tool lets us, it's designed to use land a little bit more efficiently and flexibly. So it allows for 2 primary uses to be here. And just access via an access drive like what's shown here, rather than needing to divide the lots out and build a full kind of blown public road to give that second lot frontage. The only real staff comment that came up during review had to do with the access drive. Like I mentioned in the report, we talked with the fire department for their purposes to make sure they had adequate emergency access to get back there. If needed, they looked for that 20-foot wide road just so emergency vehicles could come in and out. And that was
I think primarily due to the fact that it was set so far away from Kelly Road that bringing water back there was a little bit more of a necessity than being able to access it right from the street. The 15-foot strip that kind of goes through the wetland area was a compromise that the fire department was okay with. Seeing as, that's something else that, the town is looking to minimize as well as DEP. So yeah, that pretty much covers it. Sean, I think, touched on everything else. The buffers are there. Traffic isn't really an issue with a use like this. There's no minimum parking requirements or real additional impact there. Yeah, I mean, this will be really the first one of these larger scale solar projects that we see. So yeah, we were excited to see something like this come forward. Yeah, happy to answer any questions for the board as well.
Thank you. I do have a couple. Didn't get any engineers review. I didn't see anything from Mandy with this project.
Yeah,
I mean, there
we,
was hydrology and stuff. So typically for larger projects, but I didn't see anything from her.
yeah, I didn't hear anything, any specific comments from Mandy. We sent for review to
Okay.
Rob and Mandy, but we didn't get any comments back from them. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Just a couple of questions. We didn't have a review from Mandy, so I was just taking a look at the stormwater piece. I saw you widened the road, but the narrative in the submission all still is based on a 15-foot road rather than a 20-foot. And just rough math, Sean, just looking the impervious area seems to be, or could be a bit more than what you've had in your application. Did you rerun that?
I don't believe we reran the numbers. The 5 feet over that length is not really anything significant. I mean, I'm
Had like
I'd-
6,000 square feet.
yeah, over
and
the
then-
whole
yeah.
project of,
Yep.
I mean, the 17-acre clearing site total, we're at about.
Yep.
So with that added, we're around 30,000 square feet of impervious area. It's pretty minimal, in the grand scheme of the project. So I wouldn't anticipate it would have any significant change to the.
Right, I'm just looking
the
after
numbers.
the town's interest, and I
Yeah.
think our ordinance requires the pre and post situation for a 25-year storm. So again, just covering the town, the submission has 15 feet, not 20 feet.
Correct.
So I'm wondering whether you could confirm that, because your numbers are bang on.
Right.
And you're right, it's likely they won't need anything, but it'd be nice to actually have numbers that show that. So
Okay.
I just, maybe if you rerun them, it just looked like, we're right on the verge and, I don't think it needs any more permitting. That's what you
Right.
get paid to do, but
Yeah,
Just
it wouldn't,
the
it wouldn't change
submission.
it wouldn't change our level of permitting with
Right.
DEP or anything. It would just reflect, I guess,
Yeah, 'cause
the
you
numbers
modeled
we provide.
just the road surface. I mean, but the fill extensions and toe slope, I would figure there'd be a bit more impervious. This was just with quick math and looking at the number you had, but that's as far as my
Yeah.
review went.
No, we can rerun the HydroCAD with the wider road.
Yeah, that would be helpful just to make sure pre and post work out.
Yeah.
All right. Because that is a submission requirement. So again, that might be a condition of approval, just as long as it is good with Mandy or good with you.
Yeah.
I don't think the board would need to see it again, but make sure on that would be good. I don't recall, because this parcel came up, those of you, Krista and I think John and maybe even Michael, the application that was submitted a while ago that was potentially going to connect Page Place and behind the Boy Scouts. I was just trying to figure out, from those projects, and I'm just thinking back on the applications from back when, whether there are any trails in there. And I guess Dave Thompson isn't here to advocate for trails, so we got to pick up the slack. So are there anything with a land trust out there that we have to be concerned with? I know there was one near the interstate, but I think, this is a pretty big parcel and the land trust has a lot going on, so.
I think there are some, I don't know how formal they are. I think there are some trails out there. And I don't think. Obviously wouldn't be able to allow trails within the fence.
Correct,
But any
yeah.
sort of access around the fence would still be, wouldn't be a problem, I'm sure, for.
Yeah, it just, there's an awful lot going on.
And I would, I just remembered something, if we can jump back to stormwater real quick.
Yeah.
When we widen that section of road.
Yeah.
We also shortened the road because the original plan had the equipment pad more towards the middle of the site.
Yeah.
So the net change was, I'll verify what that was, but it wasn't the
Just-
full. We didn't just
Yeah.
leave the road where it was and then widened it because we widened it, but we also shortened it. So I think it was almost a negligible change, but I will get those numbers to you.
Yeah, as long as we have the right ones on
Yeah.
file, then it's recorded and we don't have to think about it. You were gonna say something.
Yeah, as for the trails, that trail by the highway runs right behind my house and it doesn't extend.
Okay.
That part of the system, at least that touches the highway, doesn't go that far south. It's
Yep.
further north. I don't know about the ones that are around Page Place, though.
So that's something, if you could look into, and I don't know if this came up during discussions, but I think you've been in front of this board enough, Sean, that trails are a really big deal. And if there's an impact from this project and the opportunity to reroute them, just to make sure there's continued connectivity, that would be, I guess, appreciated. Kyle, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly loop in the land trust to get their feedback.
For any large
the-
project, we've been pretty consistent
Yep.
with this, but.
Yep. Yeah, as it's not, I don't know of any formal agreements. I don't. did
I'm
you
not
come
aware
across
of any
I don't think there are any like,
Formal agreements
formal
for trails. I
easement or
remember,
trails
I think
across,
the
but-
previous project that you're referring to, Phil, when we actually did that design for the business park
Yeah,
in that area. I do remember some trails, but I think they were, like she mentioned, further to the north in there, but I know that there were some trails in that general area, but
if you could take a look, because we wouldn't want to dead end something that's
right.
Yeah. So
ongoing for a while.
I think one thing we could do is, I mean, one of the conditions that I recommended on there was a pre-construction meeting.
Yep.
We could probably invite land trust representative to that meeting and just give them a heads up beforehand.
I mean,
to
they
let
have
them
good
know.
maps and
Yeah.
I just thinking like Dave Thompson. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Kyle, you had one comment in your recommendation. So I saw they prior to the issuance of the building permit, which this is a good idea. So if these projects, if they stop or fail, whatever, so that we have a performance guarantee that will cover at least 100%.
Yep.
So that was pretty vague. I saw you modeled the cost like for 20 years out or something like that. The
You're referring
removal.
to the decommissioning?
Yeah, decommissioning. So I just wanted, I just saw your comment. You said at least, and I wondered what you meant by that, because that's kind of vague. Is
So that's how,
their estimate sufficient or do they need?
right, we would go up their estimate.
Yeah.
I think the way the ordinance is worded is at least 100%.
Yeah.
In case someone wanted to provide a
Okay.
guarantee more than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would use the estimate that they came up
Seemed
with.
reasonable. You went out 20 years, but
And there is a, not in the condition, but in the provision in the actual ordinance language, it talks about getting an updated figure every, okay, I think it was 5
Yeah.
years.
That's
Okay.
a DEP requirement for a decommissioning plan, that you need to update it every 5 years.
But so even beyond that 20-year projection, the ordinance asks for a consistent update. So it doesn't just sit with that flat in performance guarantee, and then 30 years from now, that number is totally different. And
Yeah. Cost change
Yeah.
year to year. I saw you projected out a ways, but. Those are all the questions I had. Anything else from the board?
You actually touched on both of my questions, but I had more questions about the decommissioning. So just like quick Googling, the average life of a solar panel a ground mounted solar panel is ballpark 25 to 30, but the decommission plan is based on 20. Kind of, how does that work with the break even kind of point? And is the decommission plan actually to decommission them after 20 years, or is it kind of at when they start to kind of degrade or break down, or what does that decommission plan actually look like?
So I couldn't tell you as far as the breakdown, as far as where the break even point is. The decommissioning plan is set up so, and this hopefully wouldn't happen, but say they built it in 3 years from now, for whatever reason, the project stopped generating power. The money's there for at any point, the project to be decommissioned, everything to be removed from the site. So these projects generally have, I'm not exactly sure what this one is. Typically, it's like a 20-year lease with then options to extend that to like 5 or 10 years when that comes up. But the decommissioning plan could be good for at any phase, whether it's year 2 of the project or year 20, but every 5 years, we're required to update what that cost is. So there's always money. As you guys noted, as prices are continuously going up. So whatever we have for a surety right now, in 4 or 5 years, that might not be adequate. So we need to update that and provide that new surety amount to cover it at that time. And that's a continual process until the project has reached its end life and is decommissioned. Or, and theoretically, those panels can be, the panels may only be good for 25 or 30 years. They can be replaced and the project's not decommissioned. They can remove panels, put new panels in, and the project could keep going on. But that's decommissioning is more when it stops generating power and everything needs to be removed. So it's not just the panels, it's all of the infrastructure that's part of the project.
Yeah, I can tell, like, when we were doing the ordinance language, the decommissioning was, it was sort of a follow-up to the section on abandonment in the event specifically that a property owner, developer who is operating one of these systems kind of just left the picture, and the town wouldn't be just financially responsible for having to deal with an entire, solar array that was no longer working. Yeah, I think as for the actual lifespan of the panels, as long as there is a will on the owner's side, then I would imagine they would just continue to be replaced until,
Yeah,
there
as
was
long as
no longer
everything is
desire.
going good, they would swap out panels as needed.
I saw Glenn Walker, who's applicant, has raised his hand, so I'll promote him if the board. Okay.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
You're a little quiet, Glenn.
Can you hear me, Kyle, or no? Is that better?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Welcome, everyone. Yeah, I don't want to eat up too much time, but the reason the decommissioning bonds are 20 years is that's typically the contracts with the state net energy metering program. So it's a 20-year program. But Sean's absolutely right. The goal would be to replace panels, inverters, and keep this project going maybe 40, 50 years, whatever makes economic sense. So, but the 20 years ties to the state net energy billing program.
Thank you. Other questions? So just to confirm, you're going to provide updated calculations just to make sure the hydrology works. So is the site plan in our packet? I did see the little jog out from the wetland, so it does look like the 15 to 20, but is it the right length?
Yes, the plan that you have is accurate.
Yeah,
It's just the numbers in the
Yep.
in the narrative didn't get changed.
okay. Yeah, very good. All right, I'm going to open up the public hearing. Do have a few people in the audience. Please, if you have concerns or comments, please step up to the mic and tell us who you are and where you live. Please, John, could you please step up? Yep.
Will this be visible?
And you are?
I'm John Jemison. I live at 8 University Place. I didn't really know much about this, but I've seen that site behind the Boy Scouts. Will there be a strip that's left of trees and whatnot? So if you were driving down Kelly Road, you wouldn't see directly to it and then you go in further and then you get it cleared? I couldn't really tell heads or tails from the map, but so I was just kind of curious if that was, and will it be visible from the interstate? I'm just kind of curious, that's all.
John?
There will be trees left in place.
Could you bring up the site plan and?
Yeah.
Just- Oh, okay, there we go, you're doing it. Yep.
Can I come over here to try? I can't see.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a row of trees all along the southwest. A lot on the north, and then also the northeast, you can see the interstate. The town actually invested in inhabitants down at Orono. So there's a big stretch of land there between our project and the interstate. That's gonna remain wooded.
Yeah.
And I don't believe you'd be able to see it in Kelly Road either, the way it's so far back. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Other questions? All right, and we don't have to, are we doing anything online? Any online questions? You still do that, correct? Because these are all.
I don't see any hands raised online.
Last call from the audience.
Next door, neighbor of Katahdin Council. And I am in support of the project.
Mhm.
I just wish there is some way. I know that the project use lots of information from potential business park from 2011, I think. And there is a horseshoe right away, which went through several properties
Mhm.
and returned from Kelly Road to Kelly Road. And I was wondering, is there any possibility the project will allow that to still exist? Because project is for 20 years and maybe being extended for another 20. So for next 40 years, that whole part will be kind of blocked from, and that is entryway to town,
Mhm.
basically an ideal place for businesses to be located. So I was wondering if there is any way that that horseshoe can be protected somehow.
That's a good question. I thought of something similar, but then this board is limited to the
I understand.
application in front of us.
I
So
understand. I could not
It
help
would be
myself.
great to see the connectivity, but if we could have a little sidelight, what remains of that
So it
project that we approved? And I think there was a right of way that went straight in there, but
the right of way doesn't exist anymore. It basically timed out a
Alright.
couple years ago. So anything to do something similar to that would require that whole kind of process to undergo again. And I mean, that would be more of a council process to come up with that agreement again. So.
it's a good idea to maintain connectivity, but because of the age and when that one was approved and it just never went anywhere, unfortunately.
Well, anyway, I'm in support of a project, as I could not help myself, not to mention
No, that's
a
fine.
possibility down the road, kind of. So
No.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Any others? Last call for online? Nothing? All right, I'm gonna close the public hearing. Remaining questions from the board? All right, Kyle, do you have proposed findings of fact for us? You have a copy? There is an extra copy, Sean, if you want one. All right, I'm gonna read all of these into the record. Again, these are just proposed findings of fact for our consideration, but I'm gonna read them all into the record and then ask for your comments after I do that. So these are proposed, as I said, findings of fact for Orono Solar LLC for the site plan review application, July 19th, 2023. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 18-177 of the Orono Code of Ordinances, the Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Orono Solar LLC for a major site plan for a large-scale solar energy system located at 90 Kelly Road, tax map 30-0, lot 14 in the Economic Development Zone District. And based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public found the following. Number one, requirements of the district that the proposed group development and large-scale solar energy system uses are allowable in the Economic Development Zone District, and the development meets all applicable dimensional requirements. Number two, compliance with town ordinances and codes, that the proposed use meets the provisions of applicable regulations of the town, including all pertinent sections of Chapter 18 Land Use Ordinance. Three, utilization of the site, that the proposed project reflects the natural capabilities of the site and that environmentally sensitive areas are preserved to the maximum extent possible. Four, traffic and pedestrian access, that the development will generate minimal traffic to the site only for service and maintenance purposes, and that adequate emergency access has been provided. Number five, storage of materials, that the project does not propose any exposed storage of materials. Six, stormwater management, that the development will not have any adverse impacts in regards to stormwater management, as post-development conditions are expected to remain similar to pre-development conditions. Seven, erosion control, that erosion control measures will be implemented meeting the specifications contained in the Maine Department of Environmental Protection's Best Management Practices Manual. Eight, water supply and sewage disposal, that the development does not require water supply or sewage disposal. Nine, utilities, that the development provides for the necessary electrical utilities to adequately meet the anticipated use. 10, groundwater and surface water quality protection, that the proposed project does not adversely impact either the quality or quantity of groundwater available to abutting properties or to public water supply systems. 11, hazardous, special, and radioactive materials, that the use of the site does not involve the handling, storage, or use of hazardous, special, or radioactive materials. 12, shoreline relationship, that the site is not within the shoreline zone. 13, solid waste management, that the proposed use will not generate any solid waste. 14, historic and archaeological resources, that the project area is not known to contain historic or archaeological resources. 15, financial capacity, that the applicant has a financial capacity to carry out the use. And lastly, 16, noise and lighting, that the development will comply with the sound level limits as set by Chapter 13 of the ordinance, and that no outdoor lighting is proposed as part of the development. All right, with all that being said, we have had some discussions on stormwater management. We did talk about trails, so some of that traffic and pedestrian access. So we have discussed some questions in here, but are there any issues with all of the items I just read into the record? All right, I think we're ready for a motion. Did you get those two extra items? If you want to take a crack at it,
Sure.
sorry.
I propose that we approve the site plan for Orono Solar LLC for a solar energy system located at 90 Kelly Road, tax map 30-0, lot 14 in the Economic Development Zone, and include the following recommendations. That prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant shall provide to the town a performance guarantee that will cover at least 100% of the estimated cost of removal of the solar energy system. And prior to the issuance of a building permit, a pre-construction meeting be held with the town staff and a land trust representative and any other relevant developer parties, so that a discussion can be had to make sure all conditions of approval have been communicated and the logistics of the construction process have been made clear, and that the applicant shall receive any necessary local, state, and federal permits or approvals prior to the operation. In addition, the applicant will include in the narrative the impervious surface calculation.
Pretty good. You know what we want. All right, thank you. That was great. Do we have a
Second.
second? Very good. Further discussion? All right, all those in favor? All those
7 in
opposed?
favor, none opposed.
There we go. Thank you very much. All right, next up. We have another public hearings. This is for a site plan review application by Bangor Natural Gas located on 19 College Avenue, tax map 19-4, lot 67 in the medium density residential district. The application proposes the installation of a natural gas pressure regulation, a regulating station, also referred to as an essential service by town ordinance, to be installed on the west side of the parcel behind the existing building. Project scope includes an access drive from the existing parking area to the back of the lot, where there would be an approximately 2,200 square foot fenced-in area surrounded by a buffer of evergreen hedges to house the associated equipment in a 204 square foot shed. Can I have a representative of the applicant?
Good evening. My name's Paul Monyak. I'm a civil engineer with Haley Ward representing Bangor Natural Gas. With me tonight, I have two gentlemen from Bangor Natural Gas if we need their assistance, Tim Garnett and Ryan Rancourt. As Phil had just nicely stated, the project is very simple. It is an area in the back of this existing property. You may recall it's the auto shop that is sort of at the intersection of College Avenue and Park Street or Main Street. And the idea is off of the end of the paved parking, they'll take a gravel road back to a small parking area where they can access a fenced in gravel pad, 2,200 square feet. And that's where all of your gas pressure regulating equipment will be housed. And so that's what you see in this plan. To the left in the darker hatch is the gravel pad, and the equipment to the right is the drive-in and the parking. And you can see there's a hedge of sorts. It's more of a tall evergreen shrub that will go around the entire development. And the idea there is to have that buffered and hidden from view of mostly everybody who's in the vicinity. The skew angle from Park Street there makes it so that you shouldn't really be able to see either if those trees are in place. And so for this particular parcel, that area is not developed in the essence of there's no pavement, there's no buildings. There is some vegetation that will be removed. Nothing substantial to report of. And when they go back and put that in, there will be one light just for safety purposes when they come in. And that's in that upper corner, the upper right-hand corner there. So this area is relatively flat to begin with. Stormwater goes from the right of the page to the left of the page. When you look at from the back of the building, everything from the front of the building out goes to the Park Street, College Avenue intersection. So our project is in the area that's going to go to the left, which is just a few feet away from, well, it's a couple hundred yards probably from the river. And that's where the water will end up eventually. We are flattening the site just to make it level and more accommodating of what we have proposed there. As was stated in the initial entry, I just wanted to reiterate what Bangor Natural Gas had put in their application here that, this is part of a longer project, and the idea is to extend this pipe, and it's going to help with the pressure problems that are currently occurring in town. They did do an extensive review of various sites in the town, and this turned out to be the best one for improving the system that's currently in town. So that's how that was chosen. And let's see, there was another, oh yeah, so it'll substantially improve the low pressure spots of the systems. And the idea is to kind of hide this in the back corner of that property. So doing so, it reduces the amount of pipe needed, the amount of disturbance needed, both to infrastructure in the street, the public right of way, as well as back onto the property. And that way they can, save any disturbance to the road and any pavement that might be needed. And as you know, that's a pretty heavily traveled intersection. So when we look at things, going through the checklist, a few things that we had noted as more or less waivers, there's no water sewer, so we didn't indicate or talk anything about that. Stormwater systems on that site, there is nothing to speak of. The other things, there's no signage that's being proposed as part of this project. The one light that I talk about in that upper corner, just to light the parking area when they come in and access it. Same thing with traffic. This is not something that's going to generate traffic to any degree. It's a utility that's supposed to function on its own with the occasional visitation for maintenance, upkeep, and just, maybe once a month or so, someone will come and take a look at it. The stormwater, when you talk about the runoff, the soils aren't, they're more of a type C soil. So when we switch from C grass to gravel, it's a fairly small change. So we're not expecting a ton of runoff as a result of this project. As you know, the front portion of the project has pavement in the building. As I stated earlier, it goes out to College Avenue. At this time, there are no plans. This plan does not indicate, nor are there plans to do anything with any of that development at this time. The client is just focused on getting their system up and running as soon as possible. There were a few questions that came in once we submitted the application through staff reviews, and I think Kyle relayed those to me. Before Bangor Gas purchased this property, they did do a full environmental site assessment. It produced like a 700-page report where they looked at everything and anything that's on this site. And at this time, there's nothing that is of immediate concern on the site or a hazard to potential public health. So as long as nothing's disturbed, we're not creating any additional, with the existing development. As long as we don't disturb anything with the existing development, we're not releasing any sort of environmental hazards into the air. So, which is a lot of why we chose to bring the gas line in on the side where we did, because of that extensive research of what's happening on that site. Let's see. We did have, I had listed it as a waiver at one point, but we did provide some capacity, financial capacity. This is part of the approved budget for Bangor Natural Gas to get this work done. This is something that's been in the works as part of a larger project to improve the facilities through this area. So I think with that being said, I'll open it up to any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you. Kyle, could you fill in the gaps for us from your review?
Sure. So this site is located in our medium density residential district. So the existing or previous auto service use and gas station before that would have been considered non-conforming. Those wouldn't be allowed there today. It's really solely a residential district. That being said, something like this, where it involves utility work, falls under what we would consider essential service. If a utility is more just kind of pipes or new lines or things like that, wires, cables, anything like that would just fall under, our normal essential service use, which would typically be a permit. If there's a building involved, it becomes a kind of the next tier up from that. And that's why it comes to the planning board as an essential service building. So as Paul mentioned, there's a 204, I think, square foot, shed there that's housing some of that equipment. That being said, as an essential service use, it's allowed to coexist on a lot with another principal use. The idea is that, you know, you could use a lot in town or wherever it needed to be. These are allowed in an essential service would be allowed in any zoning district in town. And the idea would be that, you know, the location of those, as we see here, you know, it could be beneficial to locate something like this on a part of a lot that's already used for something else. So while the existing building on the site might not be used right now or in the immediate future, it does sort of preserve the front part of that site. If it were to ever be used for something else, it would still have that capability. In the meantime, traffic and pedestrian access, I think at this site has been a pretty big staff concern in the past. I mean, just that intersection where the curb cut is, having pedestrians cross across that curb cut as they're walking along that area is not the most ideal situation, and it's certainly not conforming to what we would allow right now in our ordinance. So this project with Bangor Natural Gas purchasing the site and the current use sort of stopping any, you know, public traffic from really coming onto the site, it would definitely have a positive impact in that regard. As you know, you'd see a lot less visits to the site. Essential service buildings do have a little different dimensional requirements than, you know, typical principal buildings would. It's the same side setbacks. So you can see the 10-foot setbacks on the plan are more than met by the building itself. It's a 5-foot setback in the rear, which you can see that, you know, that 5-foot line is, you know, right there. So the gravel area is well beyond that. The building that, you know, I don't know if board members got all the way through the application, but there was one page with the building rendering on it. Part of the provisions and standards in the ordinance for essential service buildings is that they're supposed to be of a material and style that sort of blends in to the surrounding area. So the one that was submitted, the example was, I believe, a green building with brown pitched roof. The building's 10 feet tall, so it should look like, you know, a typical accessory structure that you would find in any kind of residential area. And then the kind of consistent vegetated buffer surrounding the entire perimeter, along with whatever kind of trees and vegetation remain in that kind of back corner of the lot that's not being proposed to develop, should hopefully screen the area from view from any of the immediate abutting properties there. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it from our primary concerns. But happy to answer any follow-up questions.
Good. Thank you, Kyle. Guess I've just got a couple, just to kick us off here. Did notice, so the agency letters, you did hear back from Historic Preservation, but there was no Fish and Wildlife. Have you heard from them?
Actually, I do have a letter from, actually, I think it was the Natural Areas Program. I never did hear back from Fish and Wildlife, so biology or the fish.
So we'll need those. I'm
Yeah,
assuming nothing, but
Yeah.
we'll need those on file.
so I've sent all those out, and at the time of the application, I don't know that I had any of them, but I have received a few since then, and I'll get those over to Kyle.
Yes, I saw the historic one was in there, but you had
Yep.
2 for Fish and Wildlife, and there was
Yep.
no response.
Yeah, one for the fish and one for the wildlife biologist, so.
Yeah, there was nothing that we knew of, but. yeah,
Probably
we-
not, but.
Right,
we
but
just
yeah,
need
we
to-
can
need
put
those
those in the
letters,
file.
yeah.
Yep.
Kyle, similarly, you put this out to Mandy and
Yep.
no response?
Yeah, I sent it out to all staff. Rob, I think Rob forwarded it to Megan as well.
Yep.
And Mandy, and didn't hear any comments from them.
Okay.
So, yeah, with the impervious area not being, with it being a minor site plan, the full stormwater management plan isn't a requirement like it is for the major site plans. So the full calculations aren't requirement here like they were with the previous plan. Yeah, more looking at those drainage patterns and the proposed impact, and with it flowing towards the river and not being a huge impervious area, we're not expecting too much.
Yeah, I didn't-
runoff
this
there.
one had really
Yeah.
less going on than the other one. Hazardous waste stuff. So I know you talked about how you located to minimize any impacts
Yes.
to the phase one area, because the gas stations have a history there. But you said if you do during construction, if you do encounter that, you're gonna dispose of it as hazardous waste. How, there's no mention, I just want you to tell us how you propose to do that, because usually if you're digging in the ground anywhere near there, just for the supports to get the gas to
Mhm.
the rear of the site.
Yeah.
If you're digging there, somebody's got to be there with a meter, some way to detect that. How do
Yes.
you propose to deal with that?
Yes, so our company, Haley Ward, does have an environmental division. They're the ones who performed the environmental site assessment, which included doing borings on the site to try and sample the material and see the extensive, if there was any, and how extensive the contamination was.
Yeah.
And so that's how we determine where the location would be. We do expect to maybe encounter a little bit, but that was the first contract with our company. We're in the process of going to the next phase of the environmental part with my company, which is a different division, but they'll be readily and available for that as well. And the idea is, yes, if it's hazardous, it will be disposed of as hazardous waste, so the fill material.
For our findings of fact, as you heard in the last application, that's one of the items. Normally, we don't
Yep.
have any hazardous waste issues, but
Yep.
to make sure that the town is protected, that would also be, I think, some kind of condition of approval that
Yep.
some, I don't know whether it's a removal plan, but if you're excavating and you encounter
Yeah.
hazardous waste, we
Yep.
just got to make sure it gets to where it needs to be.
So, yeah, and I guess just to go a little more into that, the only place we are anticipating is the gas line coming in up the driveway.
That's what I figured, yeah.
And where, behind the building was an old septic system for the building. That building's been there, I think, 1920 or 1930.
Yeah.
And it's been various things over the years, but to that back corner, we hadn't found anything and we don't expect anything, but because they'll be there for that one little piece, any digging that happens will be on site, so.
So I'm just thinking, Kyle, so that the town is compliant or covered, that how would you propose to do that? Because hazardous waste, I just want to make sure that is addressed here.
Yeah,
This is-
so
yeah.
the primary reason for recommending the pre-construction meeting for this, I mean, typically something this small, we might not have a full-blown pre-construction meeting with code and everything, but was to, have code and public works and contractors, be able to talk through that. I know I believe it's a DEP requirement as well
Mhm.
to dispose of
Yeah.
the hazardous waste in a proper manner. So I think it's something that we would be looking fairly closely at Pat when he's doing inspections during the construction process.
Mhm.
Would probably be looking at that and keeping it in mind. And
So how about, I think something that might be reasonable is just to have a, whether it's materials removal plan, something like that. So if you encounter
Mhm.
hazardous waste, that the town knows what you're doing.
Yep, okay.
Yeah.
I was just informed too. So as part of that next step of the environmental process, we're exploring or working towards a VRAP through the Maine Department of Environmental Protection for this site. So that's the next phase of this. So it's sort of like two concurrent projects where they want to get this in and done, but also they're aware of the fact that the site as a whole needs to be addressed. So
Right.
DEP has been contacted and the VRAP is basically a self-reporting process where you're saying, hey, we know that we have hazardous on our site and we're gonna, do our best to keep it encapsulated and then deal with it, like you said, through hazardous removals if we need to for projects like this, so.
But he mentioned discussion during pre-construction meeting.
Yeah.
But any documentation that you have that's gonna explain and cover what you're
Okay.
gonna do with that material, I
Yep.
think you'd probably come up with that pretty easy, I bet.
Is there any way you can define VRAP for me?
voluntary response action plan.
It gives you some protections. If you enter into a program like that voluntarily, you have some liability protections. If you encounter hazardous waste.
Yeah. Whereas if you just leave it and then something comes up after the fact, the current property owner, even though they might not have been the ones to do the contaminating of the soil or something like that, yeah, you could be liable. So.
All right, so we had another project in this area that we had, decent interest in from neighboring properties, so a couple discussions. I'm not sure noise came up as much, but lighting. So you talked about the location. I found it on the plan,
Yeah.
where that cursor is for those paying attention. And you provided a lighting diagram, so the narrative just says that it's going to be pointed in. We just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Same concerns we had with Tyler Technologies.
Yep.
Going to have here, that light is right near the property line. So you've said that it's going to be angled in. Usually we have a lighting diagram.
There is
Yeah.
I didn't provide a
I saw that,
photometric,
yeah, I
but
saw that.
but I have a cut sheet. And so
Yeah.
the idea is that it's, the light is an LED, it's up in the housing.
Yep.
So you're not going to see a bulb hanging down. It has the ability to be fully shielded and it's just that single light that displays. I think if you look at that's basically how the lighting photometric plan is created, is based on that little sketch that you're talking about. And the idea is it's sort of like a compass and it shows it going out roughly, 20 feet in sort of like a big oval pattern. And the idea is just to light up the parking area someone drives in, give them that, ability to see if anything's there, get in safely, and then they can access the building. So.
Yeah, as long as that's, again, typically, as
Yep.
you've submitted it before, lighting diagrams showing that there's no impact to the property line.
Yep.
You've got some cut sheets. It's not likely, but just, again, we're making sure that,
Yep.
that town and the neighbors are protected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last comment, and then I'll shut up for a bit, but we talked about noise, so same section of Kyle's review. And there's a quote here, so planning staff spoke with the engineer, you talked about the sound, and it's just some estimates, and it looks like opinion.
Yeah.
And then on the last page, Kyle said, it is not anticipated that noise from the equipment. Similar to the lighting diagram, I just want to make sure, I know it's a low hum.
Yeah.
And we have requirements. Is there any way you can provide us with, again, some of the lighting diagram? I would imagine the decibel levels, you know what these things are going to put off.
Well, yeah. and we-
There's some way that we can make sure that standard or that concern is addressed as well.
Yeah, we had that discussion. That is one of the things I forgot to bring up when I was trying to cover everything. But yes, Kyle brought that to my attention. We had a discussion internally about how we can potentially come up with some sort of decibel sound. The only issue is that each one of these stations is independent from each other. So as close as you can replicate it, it's dependent on some of the natural features that occur, including the pressure of the lines and the equipment and things like that. So we do expect a light humming, but we can't imagine. The quote at one point was that it's no louder than the traffic in the area. But we've since said that we believe, based on that chart that's in your ordinance, that we will fall under, I think it's the 45 decibels is the lowest one that's on that chart for that particular part of the town. So
If you could have just something a little more concrete. So you
Yep.
said you believe you will follow. If there's anything you can provide that would.
okay.
give
Yeah,
us
I'll
some
see if there's
assurances.
something we can just maybe several stations that have something that.
Yeah, I think even if it was just a few examples of different ones, even if they were different, and then
Yeah.
there's just some
Yeah.
average or
Yeah.
something.
That would be good.
That's
taken
it,
to
yeah. I
show.
mean, that's the only problem is they all act independent and it's hard to guarantee what's gonna actually
Yeah.
be, I guess.
So
Okay.
if we have something just a little bit more developed, that would be helpful.
But also after, once it was constructed, that's also something code enforcement, it would still have to abide by that noise level. So even if the project is, you know, approved through the planning board, the building permit's approved, and then it's, you know, in operation and it's, you know, that noise level is higher than what's allowed in the chart, then some plan would have to be come up with to manage that in some way or to reduce that sound impact on the neighborhood. So, but yeah.
Thank you. All right, that was my list, sorry. Anybody else? Yes, Bob.
College and Park Street are pretty heavy traffic areas. And what I was wondering is, a vehicle hits the building, what happens?
I
The
don't,
accessory building or the building, right?
The building, yeah. Oh, yeah, there's gas flowing through the building,
Okay,
right?
yeah, I get you. Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering, what are the safety
um,
precautions?
that's a good question, and I don't know, other than to maybe hypothesize that, I mean, yeah, I think that you'll be, the angle is not such that you can actually get a straightaway on that unless you're, I don't really know how you could get into there without hitting the trees and the fence and then the building before you end up hitting any of the piping. So there's a number of things in the way, and you can't really get a very good direct shot at it where you could have your speed up. If you look from coming down Park Street, the building's in the way, the existing building. You know, if you're coming up Park Street the other way, heading north, it's a significant left turn, almost more than 90 degrees. And the same thing with College Avenue, it would be a hard right turn. So I don't know if anything, it would be a low speed sort of impact that would probably be slowed down by the fence and
They have
the
ballers.
vegetation.
I mean, are there ballers around those things? I'm just curious. That's, I mean, it seems
Yeah.
typical that
Yeah.
I might have seen some in the close.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if it was things that we felt were within sort of that right of way where something like that could happen, but yeah, the thought was that this is so far tucked back off in the back of the property that that shouldn't be an issue, but
Yeah, can I have you at the mic too? Sorry, we are recording, so. Yeah, no, I get you, but
Anyway, my name's Tim Goddard. I'm with the Bangor Natural Gas Engineering Supervisor. My boss over there is a manager of engineering, Ryan Rancourt. But if you look, oh, let's see. Wish I had something to point at.
there we go. Oh, yeah.
If you can go back to the, I can.
Okay.
We just have to have it with online recording.
Okay. So anyway, that area, we've got the drive going in the way it is because there's quite a few fairly large trees in there.
Yep.
And we didn't want to cut any more trees or any big trees. We didn't have to. So that's a big buffer right there. You'd never get through those trees.
Yep.
With anything, actually. So you're way in there and all the stuff in the way. It's especially with that building there right now, you got almost no opportunity to get to that. I mean, a tractor trailer would be a hard time getting to it. So you'd have to really be trying.
Yeah, and it is gated, correct?
What's that?
It's enclosed and gated.
Yes, it's in a
minimally,
it's in a
so there's
fence.
no free access. Anything.
No,
Yeah, yeah.
No, people can't just go in either. It's locked.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, you're set back over 100 feet by the time you get to that equipment shed.
oh,
But-
and I might, if I just back up, can I back up a little bit about the sound?
Yeah,
About
yeah.
that noise thing. So we did contact an acoustical engineering consultant. And he gave us some input, but we also have the ability to bring them on if we need more. But he was pretty confident in modifications to the building with insulation and so forth to get the decibel level, which we have a modeled decibel level from an outfit called Powell Control. They do all kinds of stuff, but specifically the regulators are what we get from them, which they produce some noise in the cutting of the gas. That's probably where the biggest chunk of the noise actually comes from. And they kind of modeled based on worst case scenario, like a flow rate that's probably not where we're going to be for a long time. And with that, it gave us a certain number. And from that, you can kind of go through a little bit of stuff. And it's not all down in writing other than that one little piece, but it's a little hard to decipher when you look at it. But anyway, that gives a pretty good idea to this guy that we talked to, was, that's what they do, that pretty much most of that can be dealt with by the building having good insulation and some other little things to it to make that happen. So,
This is
you
an
know, this-
essential service, but you're right on the neighborhood line.
right, we are on a neighbor line. And it's only 24 feet, basically, probably from
Yeah.
the pipe or the rag to that property line. To the buildings, they would probably not even hear it, but to the property line, you could hear a little bit of something, but by the time we get done, it'll be at that 45 or below. Whatever we have to do to make it happen, that'll be what
Yep,
happens.
good answer.
I'm sorry, what?
Decibels.
Yeah, decibels, that's the, 45 decibels is extremely quiet. It's very quiet. I mean, we're making a lot more noise than that right now. We're probably in
Yes.
the 60 or plus.
The 45 decibels is the lowest. No, in the town ordinance, the 45 decibels in the MDR is the most stringent decibel requirement as far as hours of the day go. So the noise ordinance is split into, sort of 3 sections, I think, of hours throughout the day. That 45 decibel requirement in the MDR is the kind of nighttime requirement. So that's really the softest time that it would have to be. Throughout the day, that decibel limit actually goes up a little bit. So
I can say that for a good chunk of that, 10 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning is actually above that, but there's parts of the day during that night that it can be down to that level, but a lot of times it's above that. It's 50 something ambiently. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, but insulation,
Right.
everything you're telling me,
Right.
and you'll probably
Yeah.
hear from a neighbor, that, there's concerns like that.
Oh, yeah.
Lighting, noise are gonna be issues.
Yeah, and there shouldn't be any problem being able to hit that 45 at that property line. That's what we've been told, and whatever it takes to get it there is what we're gonna do.
Yeah, good, thank you. Other questions from the board?
Just comment from me. I'm in a butter. I
Okay,
don't know if you guys know it.
thank you. We have enough people today that will probably recuse from voting, but
fine.
thank you for bringing that up, John. Any questions? Yep, Ashley.
So my understanding of this project is that its size and kind of traffic wise, it's really similar to kind of one of those roadside like telecom buildings. Which means you're probably not going to have a lot of traffic from Bangor Natural Gas. Is that correct?
Right.
What's your plan to make sure that the existing building on site isn't going to fall into disrepair, especially in a kind of low traffic situation? Like what's the plan in place there?
What do we want to say on that?
Ryan Rainport with Bangor Gas Engineering Manager. So with any station that we have monthly inspections. And with that, we check for things like the condition of the building, and we want to be good neighbors with this project. So once it's built, when it comes to sound or looks or sight issues with the lighting, and certainly always give us a call to address those issues, and we're here to modify and work with the neighborhood. Any maintenance, we'd be there to repair it at request and keep up our own standards for the condition of those buildings.
Can I ask a question? You were referring to the regulating building we're talking about, not the other one.
Not the one you're building, the one that's existing on the site.
The existing.
Yeah, like
That's
what's
what I
the
was
what's the
thinking.
plan to make sure that that doesn't fall into disrepair and kind of potentially either be an eyesore or dangerous as a building? Because when a building's not in use.
So similarly, we'll plan to work closely with the town. My boss, Jerry, the president of the company, has been talking closely with Sophie about our planned use. Right now, we're not really sure. Our main focus is constructing this regulator station on the site.
Any
So-
change of use, so that would have to come before us, Kyle. I mean, if it's a non-conforming use, but if they switch gears and want to do something else, it'd be before us, correct?
Yeah, so there's been interest in this site for years now. I've gotten more phone calls about this site than probably any other site in the town, just because it's pretty aside from a use like this that we're talking about, it's pretty difficult for someone to go in there because like you said, the existing former use was a non-conforming use. So for anything different to go in there, commercial business, again, it would have to come to the planning board and show that it's less impactful on the surrounding area than what's currently there. So anytime anyone had an idea about a retail business or anything like that, that's bringing more traffic in there, it would become really difficult for something like that to go in. So yeah, I think, I know, there's been some conversations about, with the town and Bangor Natural Gas, involving that intersection going forward about potential things that could happen. But yeah, there could be other uses that are allowed in the MDR that come up, or there could be another non-conforming use but yeah, it would all have to either be reviewed in some capacity, either through code or
Does have to
planning
be.
board or something.
We can't consider that this evening, just because that's not.
Right.
not
But if
this
there, I
is.
would say if there was a problem with the building itself, I mean, that would be a code enforcement issue. That would be something if, if we got a phone call or just driving by, something was visibly obvious. That's something Pat would take a look at and then work with them to kind of resolve and get it to where it needed to be.
Got it.
And that would be based off our building, like our property maintenance standards in that section of our ordinance.
Very good. Other questions? Open up a public hearing, invite people to step up to the mic, tell us who you are, where you live.
So I'm John Jemison again. It's unfortunate for me because we come into this with no information whatsoever, and we just we're trying to see where things are, trying to place where things are, and it is really challenging. So currently the entire property is going to be bought by Bangor Natural Gas. The entire property has been purchased by y'all, right? So you all have done complete and thorough testing and you all have a good picture of what's a problem on the site. You've picked this site because you can get access to it with minimizing any disruption to what is currently problematic on the site. Am I correct so far? Okay,
Yes.
thumbs up on that. So my two questions are, first of all, the people that have rented the auto repair people that have rented the place from the Gavins, I've known them for 25 years. Cheryl just died of cancer. Her son has cancer. There is clearly a problem. If you've walked by that site on a damp, cool, calm day, you smell solvents in that site. It is so my question really comes down to, are we just going to put this tuck it back there and leave everything else alone and nothing else is ever going to happen? Is there a strategy to try to clean up the problem that's already there? How intensive and how involved is this going to need to be? And when would it start and when would it end? Because we're having so much fun, already next door. I'm just kind of curious, like, what's the potential here for, and what kind of a game plan do y'all have? And that may not necessarily, but, and can we as people, as abutters and nearby people, can we know when and can we know what you have found on the site to confirm my suspicions? That's one set of questions. And then the second set of questions is really, what kind of evergreen berry are you planning to plant there? Because we have, a wildlife preserve and they usually eat most of the things that we plant around there. So thank you for that.
I'm going to take part of that first one, Mr. Jemison, that we had a discussion about this before, but right now they've done the phase 1 and phase 2, the site assessments to figure out what's there. In this project, they don't propose to modify that building or any of the developed area that's currently there. And that was my question earlier, that if they do decide to dig in the ground and disturb some of that, how are they going to deal with that? And they're going to submit to us, you know, a little bit more formal document of how they're going to address that. But this evening, we really can't review, or that's just not part of our purview this evening, to look at what they might plan for the future and how they would remedy that site. That's just not something that this board can discuss. What my question was, as part of this, and where they have to put the gas line in, you know, from the bottom of that drawing going to the gap in the hedges, the proposed hedges, that gas line going in there, they might have to excavate in some of the disturb or the contaminated areas. And that was my question, and to make sure that they had a plan to deal with that. But as far as the rest of the site, we can't really go there this evening, but.
Will we, who
So-
do we go to?
So that was my next question. Yeah, again, to clarify, because Ashley asked about the building and upkeep. And that to me is a code issue, because they're really not, they don't propose to do anything with that. So if they come back with another plan and they have, you know, they want to put in a building smaller on the footprint than there's there now, and it's a change of use, they'd be before us. And if they have to excavate, disturb all that, I think they'd have a plan in place. So, but that's not something that they propose this evening. So,
Feel like.
yeah, and jump in.
A little bit.
by all
So
means.
the applicant also talked about the VRAP, which is that voluntary action response plan through DEP. So their DEP would be the more formal body dealing with the actual environmental impact on the site. Like, let's say the auto repair shop just stayed there. That was the use as it has been in the past. The town wouldn't, as it hasn't, step in and just start testing the site or require cleanup of the site. If there was a problem with contamination or something like that, DEP would be the one to kind of step in. I think, you know, if you go back in our files, I mean, you can see on the site at one point, DEP was involved in removing the fuel tanks that were buried there from when it was a gas station. So as, you know, the applicant moves forward with the environmental assessment and they kind of get into that territory of doing that VRAP, they'd be going through that process with DEP. So obviously, I think the town would be notified there, but that's not really a process that we're directly involved in reviewing. If a use was proposed on that front part of the site that required the site being cleaned up, through our approval process, we could require that DEP approval or whatever is needed be there before the applicant was given, you know, a building permit or anything like that, like how we do with any other kind of state or federal permits that a project needs. So, you know, all the time projects need permits and approvals from other entities outside of the town. We usually make those conditions of approval, or they're just part of the application, and then we look at them in that capacity. So if there was more development elsewhere in the site that was, you know, I think it was a more intensive use, and there was more of a role in that the, you know, potential contaminated parts of the site, that's more the process we would be looking for there. But as this is sort of just kind of dealing with that corner where they've identified it to be less impactful in terms of that potential contamination. And they're really just adding on a use. They're not changing what was already there. There's no mechanism required through town ordinance to kind of review that any further. So,
Yeah, I mean, I guess for what it's worth, I've shared what I know, and that's, you know, from a 30,000 foot level. You know, the environmental stuff is not my expertise. That's why we have a whole division for that. What I do know is that, you know, they are taking steps, the VRAP being part of it, steps that haven't been taken to this point with any other occupant or owner of that site. I don't disagree that you probably are smelling stuff, but that's why I tried to say earlier, there's like the two projects. There's the get this gas regulating station up while there's another arm that's kind of working on the VRAP and the things that are happening there. So.
I'll just add a little bit to that. So the VRAP, we've already got the VRAP there. We should have, like yesterday, had the EMMP. What does that stand for? I forget. I forget what it's, but it's the program to whatever you have to do if there is contamination, how you deal with it. In this particular area, I can say that where we want to go with everything that we're doing, they have those areas of concern. I think they might be in the packets, somewhere in those reports that was included. Did they get all that? That's a lot of paper.
There's a one-page narrative, but I
Yes,
don't.
we
there
did.
wasn't a
Yeah,
lot
this
of-
thing is probably something you'd have to look
700
at. Yeah, it's like 700 pages long. Actually, I think the other one is shorter than that. But anyway, it has areas of concern. And they have different, ratings of how bad they are depending on what's there. And I say bad kind of relative terms. And the one that's really where we're doing stuff is like called area of concern number 4. And it's not really listed. It's listed one time, but it's not much. But even so, when we get to any spot that is an area of concern that we have to do any digging, we get a hold of, actually, I guess it's going to be a guy named Rick Curry. I just found that out, actually. He's been assigned by the DEP for this site. And we get a hold of him and they come, we dig in, they check it out, they determine if there's an issue, if there's not an issue, and what happens. And then we follow that EMMP from that point on for that particular spot. As for the building and all that, like I said, it's not part of this. The other building, that existing building, I could say the recommendation by the individual that did a lot of this site assessment was if you did something to the building, like if you kind of removed it, it would probably be best if you didn't go any further than the foundation.
Right.
Because when you start getting into lower levels, then you are starting to get into stuff that, well, now you got to look at it even closer, but you can actually cover that with a certain amount of material from that point. And it's considered, well, you probably know more about that. You're a civil guy. aren't you?
Even
Yeah.
down at Webster Point or down the street from me, when that old mill site.
Well,
They just they put a piece of fabric,
Yeah.
put a foot of soil and you don't go
Right.
below that, but
well, he said, what is it? The driveway
Yeah.
or the parking lot, I guess. That makes a nice barrier actually, but
Yeah.
for the equivalent barrier, you'd need like, 2 feet of gravel or something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know what's happening with the building right now. That's more upper level. And we're not dealing with that. We're just dealing with that part of it. It could go away. It could be reused. That would go through another process, whatever it is. But that's not determined yet. But if something had to happen to it, we still got to follow this EMMP and deal with the DEP on all of it and stuff. So.
So it sounds like you actually do have a plan for how you're gonna look into if there's hazardous waste there, because you just described it. And
Yeah, they have done it's called a phase 1, which is just a survey of everything that's there. They talk to previous owners. They look at historical photos, any documents, records, just to find out the extent of what potentially could be there in hazardous materials. So we do have that at this point.
right, and you've also designated areas as kind of low
Yeah.
concern.
It's a phase
to-
2, I think. There was a next section.
Yeah.
There was
yeah,
another.
the borings.
You do the first part and they kind of go like, we better take a closer look. Then they go to that like second phase and that's a soil investigation and so forth. Then there's another part that we added in, which was a hazardous materials assessment, which was mostly that building related, like asbestos or lead, which they actually didn't find any of that. So he said, based on what they could test and so forth, they didn't find anything there. That part we're not really so concerned about. It was the soils part. So that was a whole nother thing, like I said, with the borings and a bunch of surveying around it and stuff. And then they came up with a report on that and a lot of lab tests. Just ream of lab tests on that. So.
I do want to reel us back in though. But
Oh.
I mean, the project we have today is what we're looking at there, because we're not really concerned with excavation, what you do with the old building. That is not part of your application. So I'd like to focus on
Sure.
what's in front of us.
I know the gentleman had one other question. I think, Krista, you know your plants, right? You know some plants and you're well versed with that, right? The arborvitae, that's what the deer like to eat. and we are not proposing that. We're doing an upright juniper. So,
Yeah.
so that way they don't want to eat it and chew it.
You
So,
said 6 foot on center. I
Yeah.
don't remember the height of them, but
yeah.
again, when they
So
grow
it's
in.
it's more of that upright juniper tenacis that you see that it's usually a low hanging shrub that you see in a lot of parking lots. Well, they make an upright version as well. So that's kind of what.
A little bit of
we're
visual, a
proposing.
little bit of sound dampening,
Yeah.
I would expect. Yeah. Okay.
And then I believe there's also a question about the timeline of the project and construction. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think, I thought he was talking about the environmental part, which I don't know a timeline for that exactly, but for this project, for the pressure regulation station, I believe next year you're gonna start construction or the end of this year and it'll go till the end of next summer.
I don't know. I know they're doing, I'm not sure exactly when, but supposedly there's some, I don't know if it's reconstruction or paving or something right in that area that they have planned. It was gonna be, when was that gonna be? Okay, so it's pushed out. It was gonna be like next year. But I think the the first thing we want to try to do is get the 2 pipes we need, cross the road over to that site.
Yep.
And then from there, we can work it otherwise, but we wanted to get out of that road before they do anything. But the idea was to try to probably do that part of it if we can this year. It's a pretty small part of it. And then hopefully before the end of next year, we'd have the station in.
Okay.
Can you show us on the map where the road, where are the roads?
We do have to, I
Oh,
apologize, but I want people to go up to the microphone
Yeah.
if we're gonna have conversations, please.
Just trying to figure out where the roads are on the map.
You
Yep.
can see my cursor. Let me put my microphone on. So you can see my cursor. Park Street is here. So as you follow my cursor, be going up towards College there, past here.
The little oval shape is the island that's in the middle of the road there.
So this is Tyler's property right here. So this would be the Tyler parking area where my kind of cursor is out to Park Street. Then this be the intersection, come into where the auto parking area is, and then this would be the new driveway and then into the back area where the equipment would be. So that dashed line there is that front property line.
Very good. Other questions from the audience?
Bill, you brought up that, I'll start. Nancy Prisk, 7 University Place. My property is at the same distance from the river as John's property. So I'm on what's considered the inside of University Place. But my concerns are multiple, and I don't know how you want me to address the questions. And I hear you're really clear. We're just here to talk about this part of it. I just want to ask the town, have they asked Bangor Gas to be a good neighbor and simply remove a brownfield site as they buy the property?
Kyle, I'll let you field that one.
So I think as you talked about, they're in the process of potentially going through that VRAP and doing that cleanup voluntarily. So that's not something that's required by the town. But I think they've made it pretty clear that it's something they're interested in doing. And the town hasn't required any cleanup in the past with the previous property owner. Like I said, if it just remained as the auto use, it would have been allowed to do so. So the town wouldn't step in at any point there to say, you have to stop this activity and clean up the site. So I think in that regard, Bangor Natural Gas coming in and showing interest in doing something like the VRAP is a pretty positive step in regards to that. And it actually shows a way moving forward that the site could be cleaned up. Whereas if it had just remained, the previous use, it may not have gotten cleaned up at all, and we might not have had that opportunity at all. So I do think that this actually provides a sort of unique path forward that could be beneficial in that regard, whereas that might not have been present before. And I mean, like we talked about a little bit before, the front use of the property, yeah, I don't know, that could be a lot more conversation. I think the town is interested in kind of communicating and talking with Bangor Natural Gas and developing a relationship there to explore potential opportunities for, some partnership or, use of that front area of the lot. If there's any interest there on either or both sides. I think if Bangor Natural Gas was interested in someone else coming in and using that front part of the property, there's a good chance that they would have to go through some cleanup process. So yeah, I think any of the avenues forward that we're now realistically looking at, there's more potential hope for cleanup than there was before this happened.
Okay.
So.
I serve on the Lincoln County Regional Planning Commission. I've been on that board for over 10 years. And we are extremely active in getting brownfields funding when a property that is known to be a brownfield, and it is primarily when it is a gas station or a mechanic shop or something like that, and especially near a body of water. We get grant funding and we require that that site be cleaned up as part of the sale of the property. So I just want to go on record. There are other solutions to these things in other parts of the state of Maine. So a couple of other questions and then a couple of statements, because I have owned my property since 2002. And I'll go into that in a minute, but I've had a lot of observations on land quality, on land use, and on water flow in that area. I would love to see a copy of the phase 1 and phase 2 reports and have those made public. I sold a property in Connecticut when I bought the house here. We had been a manufacturing site for metals, and I had to go phase 1 and phase 2. It was a requirement of the town of Wallingford, Connecticut, for me to do that. And my reports were made public, and I paid for them personally. So they were not being done by a company. So if we could get access to phase 1 and phase 2, that would be terrific. That would help the neighbors, I think, set some things aside. I'm wondering, a question to Bangor Gas, when you're putting this in a site, and there are neighbors that are so adjacent. So Ford is diagonally across from me. That's number 4. And it's Hanson and Dagno property. In the space between those two houses, there is active sitting water every spring. And one of the comments of the former owner of the Dagno property was that it was an ongoing problem. It was water in their basement. When the snowfall melts, that area does not drain. Now, I'm downhill from that diagonally, and I had the same problem in my property where my driveway is. And about in 2003-04, I had SW Cole come in and do 6 test pits around my house. And what we discovered was that there was a series of streams, and you can see it when you go further up College Avenue. There's a stream that comes through from Chapel and College Heights, comes underneath, that drains ultimately into my backyard. So that comes through the properties above me on University Place. And the neighbors up there have for years had to deal with this flow of water. I had to deal with it in the sense that I would have a perpetually wet backyard. This is why I noticed that the property across the street from me was having the same issue. So when Cole came in, they did 6 test pits around my garage and the back of my house, and determined that there were 2 areas of underground water flow. One of them comes across the house next to me, the brick house, and the other one was undetermined, but it seemed to come from across the road. So I have 120 feet of drainage that starts 6 feet down that was put in with cloth and stone of various sizes, perforated pipe to direct that water flow. We tested that at the time, and there didn't seem to be any problem with the quality of the water. We were primarily looking for solids that were coming through there or any sign of petroleums. But I question if I'm sitting at an intersection of 3 streams on my property, and I can look across the street to a property that's adjacent to the pumping station. What else do we not know about that we're going to seal off with this environmental wrap? My guess is from the report, and I'll look for it, see if I still have it, the report from Cole, we have a groundwater issue in that area because it used to be a park. And so we have a groundwater issue. We have trees that are dying in that area because there is water underground. And these trees are dying, they're being uprooted. And it's just a normal tree fall in some respects, but in other ways, you can kind of see a pattern in it. So I bring this up, not because I'm a specialist in any respect in any of this, but I knew enough to do my testing. And I would really love to have the town make that test result available to us. And then I'd like to have some test pits required. And I don't know if we can require that as part of the phase 2 or not. I know we did test pits when I did the phase 2 in Connecticut. And that enabled us to see where there might be water ground flow. So I don't know where that can be. And Phil, I leave it to you whether there's follow up on this or not. And I know your field is engineering. So
I guess a couple things and leave that to the applicant as well. But, you know, again, we're bound by certain review criteria. And I mean, the primary concern for this project, they talked about stormwater runoff and that it was basically inconsequential from the size of that development, the new impervious, that it was, again, we have an engineer's opinion that it was just not significant enough, didn't trigger any DEP permitting. So no state permitting, then we rely on the town standard and basically said there's going to be no increase in stormwater runoff. Typically, we haven't ever, I can't recall any groundwater modeling. And I'm not sure if our review standard is part of this project, but if you can say you don't have any stormwater impact, again, proving no groundwater impact, boy, that'd be a hard thing to do.
my understanding on stormwater impact is that it would be making an impervious surface and the water flowing off of that. It's a small footprint.
Right.
So there might not be, but if the properties adjacent to it are already sponge-like, and I'm looking at the Dagenham property,
Yeah.
if that is already sponge-like and that wasn't obvious when they did the review of it, when they looked at it, that might be something worth going back and looking at. So that doesn't impact anything. My other 2 questions really come down to the functioning of that station, and the one is the air quality. And I don't know whether there is a discharge from the pumping station that would dissipate into the air. This morning, I was walking my dog at 8 o'clock a.m. and there was grinding of metal going on over at the site, Tyler site, that was enough that I should have had a mask on. And it was flowing very clearly. And I noted it where it was coming from. I noted it when the noise was present. I walk around University Place, there is none of it till I get back up to my driveway again. So if we are getting, and the winds come that way, they come up the river, but they also come from the Park Street area. So I'm wondering what protects the community from release of gas in that space. Is there a technology that
I'm gonna defer
captures
to-
it?
Yeah, do you want to answer that right now?
So the design of the reg station, it is self-contained monitor and control regulators. There's no release of gas in those. All it's doing is taking a higher pressure cut of 500 PSI system and cutting that down to a 60 PSI system that then it can be used by residents of the town. So there's no release of gas at this station. There's no devices. We don't use pressure relief valves that they might use in other parts of the country. So ours is all self-contained, that if there were a pressure issue, it's more of a slam shut, that a
Mhm.
valve is shutting automatically to prevent an overpressure event on the system.
Which would then cut the gas flow to the customers up the way.
We have some redundancies on the system, so as long as that didn't happen in January, which we'd be running up to the site to reopen that valve and see what's going on, but those type of events are not common to occur, and we do have redundancies built into the system
Mhm.
with another station up in Old Town. But to meet our peak demands, we need the station located somewhere on Marsh Island on the Park Street area.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And then somebody else had brought up the catastrophic situation. Building permits that I'm familiar with, again, down in Lincoln County, would require a fire truck access. And I'm wondering if fire marshal has given approval.
So, yeah, just like the previous project, we talked about the fire department having reviewed that one and asking for a widened access for the solar project that we reviewed. We loop in the fire department when all applications come in, and we look for their comment, and we didn't have any additional asks or concerns from them as far as access for this project. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. I think it's pretty much that. So my primary concern, I appreciate your answer regarding the lack of flow into the air. I think that's really critically important. Comment was made earlier about sound no louder than traffic. I'll tell you, you can go out in our yards and not hear a thing at night, nothing, period. I can go out in the morning and I can hear only birds. So if I'm going to start to hear what sounds like traffic as far down towards the river as I am, I mean, John's far more exposed to it because Tyler stripped that property. So I'm tucked into some wooded areas. And if I'm going to start to hear traffic in the morning, it's going to change the environment within my home as to where we can be to be without noise, basically. And then I question, our current code enforcement officer is a little bit more familiar with student issues and other things, or at least that's been my experience. Do we really have within the town an adequate monitoring of noise other than parties and other things that we've dealt with?
We'll have another opportunity. You can participate in the comp plan discussion again. We're gonna be
you at it
jumping
again?
into that in the next, well, Tyler will tell us, but I think we could do a little bit more with noise
Yeah.
and perhaps light it in town, but right now we're beholden to the rules on the books. And
But-
with stormwater, and again, just thinking of this project, I'm comfortable with their explanation that, I mean, it just the size of the footprint, comparatively and where it's located, that, discharges to a buffer, that there's really not a lot going on there. So there are kind of some minimums that just really don't require much for stormwater management. And that you have a stamp on that narrative with your professional opinion, and that's what
Okay.
we have to go on.
I think it would be nice if the board did take a look at where that is in proximity to the Fords and to the Dagonos. And where that side yard is in proximity. Do
Yeah,
y'all,
as
do
far
y'all
as-
do site visits?
As far as drainage that might have been ongoing, it's nice to identify these things so that perhaps Public Works at some time or another, might be able to address that. You had to do it by yourself with the French drain or whatever you had
I
installed.
put
but,
in French drains and I had a
Yeah.
French drain in the basement already.
Maybe the town can help with some of that drainage, but as far as this project goes, this is just
I mean-
a suggestion and it's being recorded. So
That's what I was gonna say. I mean, we can have a additional conversation, I think, among Public Works, and I can kind of relay that, or we can have bigger conversations about that area in general and look at drainage issues potentially in the area. Just as the town and separate from this specific
Mhm,
project.
mhm.
I mean, that's happened in the past in different neighborhoods. I mean, there's a lot of neighborhoods that experience a lot of drainage issues. So, I mean, it's definitely something there's been experience and kind of examples of elsewhere. So I'm happy to kind of pass that along
Good.
and see if we can look into that more.
That would be great. Rob is addressing some of it now by putting in a new culvert at one of the lower spots. He put a new culvert from my land underneath to my little piece of waterfront land. And the water flow has increased significantly since those were put in. So good. Thank you very much. And I first got to meet Phil on comp plan and attended many of those hearings. So I'll take your invitation. I'll be there.
Yes, good. I'm glad to hear
Thank you
that.
much.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything to her questions? I addressed some of the initial stuff, but are you good?
No. We do it online.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that, I think it was all covered, like you said, that I can't speak to whether or not there's underground rivers or streams. I'll take her word for it, because Maine does have a lot of things happening, and the soils, like I had mentioned earlier, are type C, type D, which don't have good infiltration, which is probably what you're experiencing on your property. So I will say, with the stormwater that we have there, I think pre our development, it was slightly angled towards those neighbors that you were mentioning. Now we have it sloped from the parking. It's very slight. It's mostly flat, but it does go slightly down to the left. So it's pulling that away from them. So I can't imagine they'll see any increase from our project. But they may still have those ongoing issues, whatever those are. So.
Thank you. You mentioned you had an online comment.
Paul Murphy, I'm going to promote you to a speaker if you have a question or comment.
Yes, I do. I'm Paul Murphy. I live at 7 Park Street. Pretty much it's like directly across the traffic light from Murray's, the old Getty station. The two comments that I have. The first is the regulating machinery is going to be enclosed. That is
Yes,
correct.
That is correct. Yes, it's enclosed.
Okay, so for any noise mitigation, it's like strategies and stuff, the design of the enclosure can take that into account.
Correct.
Okay, the second points towards the VRAP, and also it's like a question for the town, because I noted that the proposed gas lines for where they're going to be does appear to be very close to where the old gasoline tanks were actually situated. It's like for the property. And I was wondering if the town knows if those have ever been removed, and if not, how the Bangor Natural Gas would be able to address that concern if the proximity of the tanks and the gas lines is too close.
That definitely the location removal, all of that is on record and would have been part of a phase 1 assessment. So I know they would have identified that. The proximity to those locations, I'll defer to you, Paul. But I know the removal, all of that is part of the phase 1.
Yeah, there were a number of things that have been removed over time, including the gas tanks, and there were also some underground fuel oil tanks that have been removed as well. And so, the phase 1 definitely identified various products that were left in the building that are being dealt with through this VRAP, as well as, I think Tim had mentioned this earlier, environmental specialists all the time tell you that if you keep that cover on it, right? So whether it's the parking lot or the foundation slab, it keeps the rainwater from infiltrating the soil and then taking that with the groundwater somewhere. So, the one neighbor had mentioned that there's underwater groundwater. That's obviously another way that solvent could transfer. But the immediate concern is that, rainfall that's going to come down. And so keeping that covered is the best way to do that. The gas line, the proposed gas line coming in is near the property line. But I think I said earlier, we did do some initial test pits not very deep, but deep enough, knowing that we're only going down 2-3 feet with this trench to make sure that we're in an area that's not, you know, into some very deep or heavy solvents at this time. The VRAP is in the works. It's just a long process to get that going, and all the red tape and making sure you know, dot your T's and cross your I's with that process. So
Again, is what we requested. So the VRAP goes on, but in the interim.
Yep.
If you excavate into contaminated material, we've got a plan. It's on file.
Yep.
We're discussing it at the pre-construction meeting.
Mhm.
So we've got, well, in my opinion, we've got some safeguards in place to address that for this project.
Yep.
We're not talking about what you do with the existing garage
Sure.
or what happens later. All right, any other questions? Mr. Murphy, do you have anything more?
Nothing really, other than it's like a suggestion for, it's like the sidewalk area. It's like budding, it's like College Avenue. Of just putting some money aside for, it's like improving, it's like the walkability, it's like on that to also reduce some of the problems that were mentioned earlier about the possibility of vehicle traffic having accidents on the site. But that was pretty much it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions from the audience? Any more? We have one more online.
Paul, I'm going to mute you, so just raise your hand if you have anything else to say. All right, I'm going to promote you, Amanda Olson, to panelist so you can speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Hi, I'm Amanda Albright Olson. I am a University Place resident, but I am also an environmental geochemist, so I have some experience with phase 1 and phase 2s. I don't directly abut the proposed site. And I want to commend Bangor Hydro for starting the VRAP process. I think that's really important, and I think that that's an important thing to move forward with. But I just want to point out that no one has showed tonight. You showed a lot, the map of the site over and over again. You haven't actually showed us a map of the contamination, as there is definitively contamination there. But many of us have not seen the phase 1 report yet. But you haven't showed us a map of where you're going to be working versus where the contamination is. And so I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that the planning board is going to approve this without actually having a conversation about where that contamination is and the process you went through to delineate the contamination. The VRAP process will do, you know, like a really great job of doing that. But I guess I feel like there's this missing step between here where we're not really seeing any of the results of that site report versus the future where you'll do work on the VRAP. There's going to be a lot of work done on the site in the interim before the VRAP really gets implemented. And I guess you haven't convinced me tonight that you're not going to disturb some of those contaminated soils. And so I'm not opposed to this project, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea, but I guess I'm just going to put forward that Bangor Hydro has not shown that we're not going to disturb any contaminated soils, and that's a concern of mine. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to respond. I believe they have addressed that. And that's my understanding from our discussion this evening and what I read is that they have a process in place. They don't intend to disturb soils, but that's been our discussion, that if they do happen to have, you know, somebody on site and they hit contaminated soils, how are they going to deal with that? So that the discussion we had earlier, and I'm not sure if you participated in the entire meeting here, but we talked about making sure that was identified early on, what the process would be and how the town would be protected from that. So I do believe we have discussed that at length. You are correct that we haven't seen exactly where those contaminated areas are. But again, what I heard is that as part of the pre-construction meeting and some of those discussions with contractor, with town staff, that could be identified. So that was my understanding is how this would proceed, and that the planning board would have comfort in the fact that they've addressed that issue. But I could be mistaken.
So I think too, the ordinance doesn't specify that they can't disturb
Right. And I
contaminated
don't think
soil.
they've said that they won't.
Right, it's only
If
that
you
they
do.
have to dispose of it properly
Yes.
if it comes across. So that's what I think the plan in the narrative section of the portion, we've just shown the site plan, but the application that was submitted, had a narrative portion as well, and those have been available online for the public to view for the last couple weeks.
There was a
Now-
one-page summary of the phase
Yep.
1.
Yep.
And maybe even a little bit of the phase 2,
Right.
just a one pager out of 700, but
Yeah,
but
so.
it described the process a bit more.
Yeah. So I think they've detailed that it would be disposed of properly. And then tonight, I believe Tim mentioned a DEP representative being on site during
Correct.
construction to monitor the soil that was being disturbed during the construction process to make sure that we were kind of keeping track of whether or not the soil was contaminated in the issue that was being worked on. And that would be something during that pre-construction meeting that we could loop our code enforcement officer and staff into when certain areas were being worked on, periodic inspections to make sure that was all being handled properly on the job site during the construction process.
And I think we can handle that with a fairly well worded
Yeah.
condition of approval.
Have something else?
By all means.
So I mentioned a little bit before, I believe in one of those reports, I think you guys have access, do they have access to that, that
So-
shared?
I think there was a link in the
Link.
application to the full, whatever,
Right.
700, whatever it was.
Right, and
page
plus the other
or-
ones, I mean, just.
I
bunch
don't know
of
if there's an easier kind of, pieces of that, are just the kind of clear parts of that report that you have that you're, comfortable sharing.
Well, I just was gonna mention about it. I don't believe that they're overlaid, but there's basically of that property, there's a layout of it where they showed the areas of concern based on their drilling and all that stuff. And some of that was where the tanks are, but where we're coming across is actually south of that, outside of those areas of concern. And there's another area of concern that's basically in that station area that we're talking about, but there was nothing back there. It's just, they found something. It wasn't anything like anything else. It was just, we think this is an area of concern. So our path over doesn't go in an area of concern until we get to where the station is. And that's really where, as far as I've been told, is where we need somebody from the DP, this Rick Curry, I believe his name is going to be, will be there to see what's going on with that. As soon as we put the bucket in the ground and check it out, it's like, figure if he has to test it, what he has to do with it, and then determine path forward from that.
I'm a little rusty on VRAP, but
Well,
if it's,
I'm
if
worse.
it's public funds, if it's state funds, then I would think all of that would be publicly accessible, that information. I'm not sure, but the request, we had a request, just a couple of comments tonight about seeing that phase 1, and you paid for it. I don't know that we can make that publicly available. A lot of times those are private, it's just part of property sales, but I
think once you, with anything that we do, once the DP has
Right.
it, it's public.
you can
Right,
even
so
FOIA
you
that.
can-
Yeah.
You'd have, they can easily provide that.
That's
So,
what I
um,
figured, yeah.
Yeah, and so just to address Amanda directly, I mean, she's more privy to this, or not privy, but she has a better understanding than most of us probably in this room based on what she's saying her credentials are, so she knows better. But I just want her to know that we aren't trying to convince her that we're not. We just don't know. The problem is it's a very big unknown because we have
Right.
done extensive research. We've drilled little spot, places, but whether it's hazardous material or it's ledge or anything, you move over 1-2 feet, it could be something completely different just by the nature of how things work underground. And so, we're trying to do our best to avoid it, but we can't guarantee anything until we actually get in there. And that's why we're talking about having these plans in place.
Yep.
To help
And
address that.
that's
So,
why we flagged it.
Yeah,
during the
yeah, and,
discussion. So
and I
I'm
think-
hoping with a condition of approval with town's involvement,
Yeah.
DEP's involvement, that there's enough assurances that for this phase of the project.
Yeah.
That the town and then the neighbors are.
Maybe I want
Fair.
to, if you wouldn't mind, I'm just gonna back up quite a ways because there was something brought up about, why we're doing this project. So we mentioned it's part of a bigger overall project, which actually started in 21. And I'm sure most of you people probably saw some traffic stuff going on down there on either side of the bridge. So basically what it was is, before any of us was there, or working for Bangor Gas, for anybody that's even at Bangor Gas was working there. They had put back in like 98, 99, somewhere in that time frame, they'd put pipes under the bridge. And for some reason, I think they had some issues with how they put it in, and we were looking at it and it's like, we think something's not right here and we need to address this. And so we had it checked out. He said, yeah, you probably ought to do something with that. So we said, okay, let's get the high pressure one off, start with that. We want to basically discontinue it off the bridge. The problem is, once we want to discontinue, there's 2 lines. One's a high pressure, which goes all the way up to Old Town. The other one is a 60-pound, which goes across to Marsh Island and helps feed everything down there. But once we want to discontinue that, we need a station on Marsh Island in order to continue gas service. There wasn't really any issue with pressure. It's just a matter for us to get rid of those off the bridge. We need to put another station in to take over because now we don't have that artery going across the bridge. And that's really why we have to do this. And that was I'd say the best spot when it came up for sales, like, oh, we don't have to replace any pipe. We don't have to add a lot of steel. We basically can come right across the road with both lines, do what we need to do, and we're all set. And it's much less disturbance all the way up. Say if we tried a lot of spots looking at them, and some of them are way up Park Street. That means we'd have to dig up a bunch of Park Street and replace a line that was there to make it bigger. And this way, we don't have to do anything else. We can basically just run the lines across and it's all good. And it does actually increase our pressures and makes things even better. So it wasn't set up front, but I just thought I'd kind of give some of that background as to why we're actually doing this.
Thank you. There was a little information in the packet about the.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
mentioned
but-
in one of
yeah.
the things. So I don't know
Thank
if
you.
everybody kind of looked at that, but I figured they ought to know about that part of it and why we're doing this.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? All right, hang on. Last call.
Nancy Prisk, 7 University Place. So I'm hearing us all talk about phase 1 and phase 2. Are we going to be able to see them?
That's a good question. That was my point, whether they're accessible through the DEP, because I'm not sure that this board can request a private report to be made public.
Right, I don't think it's not a required site plan application material. I think if the applicant wants to make it
That's what I
public,
do.
or it's, public eventually at some point through the DEP
Mhm.
process, then.
Can the neighbors contact the DEP?
Yes,
Yep.
by all means, certainly you can. And then, I'm thinking if the VRAP has been obtained, DEP would require some data. So that might, maybe the phase 1, phase 2 might be even part of the VRAP approval. So maybe there's an avenue that way.
Okay,
But-
cool. So we're going to follow up with that. The neighbors will. And if there's someone at the town we can contact just to get the right contact at DEP, that would be great. Or do we contact Bangor Gas and ask for the right rep?
Not sure who it is exactly.
Okay.
You can also do a FOIA request through
I
the,
can give you my information if you want to do that. I'll coordinate the other
Yeah,
side.
there's a technical line at the Bangor Hogan Road office.
yeah,
You
you
just-
can call DEP. There's a place on their website to do a Freedom of Information Act request. And
Okay.
it's pretty simple. You fill out some paperwork, or actually it's digital paperwork, and it would get submitted, and there's a time frame, and that'll all be on the website, but you can Freedom of Information Act anything that's gone through the DEP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Super.
I'm pretty sure that, I think, what's his name? Oh, crap, I can't remember his name. He's above, Brad. He's kind of like his boss.
Dennis?
Dennis. I think he did tell me that, that it's basically, if you want to let some people know.
Yeah.
You can, you don't have to, but I think it is true that once you submit that to DEP, I think that does
Yeah,
become
that's all
public.
public
And then you
information.
can access it, which is not a problem. I don't
But
see.
yeah,
the
I just
problem.
don't think this board, it's a private report that you commission, for the property, and I don't think we can force you.
Costs a
to-
little bit of money.
Yeah, they do.
So I'm going back to Amanda's question where she asked what the map is. So I think that's the follow-up. So
Yeah, I think it'd be in that. It's gonna be a big file.
Yeah,
it's
that
okay.
So
Yep.
I guess.
that would be the phase 2 report.
Oh, that was the one thing I was gonna point out is that I can assure you that that ESA, the 1 and 2, we have multiple environmental scientists that have stamped that, so I mean, I think that's what Bangor Gas hired us to be, the experts and the professionals in terms of interpreting that data and then finding the best
Yeah, you've
the-
got to be
the
a
best route.
qualified
So-
environmental
So I don't
professional.
know, I mean, I'm not opposed, but at the same time, I'm not sure if sharing that map does anything other than maybe create a difference of opinions of multiple professionals. So at some point you have to make that decision, right?
Again, I do want to peel back. We're reviewing this project.
Mhm.
We've got enough information before us. You're going to try to avoid
Yeah.
contaminated material.
Yeah.
You're going to give us a plan for what you're going to do if you do hit something.
Yeah.
But we're not looking at the
Yep.
rest of your areas of concern. That's just not part of our review. All right. Questions? Nobody online? All right, public hearing is closed. Last comments from the board. We had a lot of great public input this evening, a lot of information. Are there any remaining issues? All right. I
Finding of
think,
fact.
yeah, I think we're ready for proposed findings of fact. Actually, procedurally, before we get into this, Kyle, we have, there's a whole bunch of red ink for waiver requests. Do we have to vote on them before we?
Make a motion to approve.
Yeah,
So you
because
can make a
normally they're
motion.
laid out. There's a lot of stuff listed out here. So again, procedurally, we should do this before we're jumping into motions and for the application, so we need to. act
Yeah,
on the
I
waiver
don't think
request.
you have to go through each one
Okay, so we'll do-
specifically, but one motion to,
so page
uh,
page 5. I look for them often. It's just we're requesting these waivers, but they're listed all down pretty much the entirety of page 5. All the red ink there. So I really didn't want to read every one of those into the record. So if we could generically approve the waiver requests. Then how do you want us to cover all this, Kyle?
I would say just make a motion to approve the waiver request for the items listed in the application rather than reading them all individually.
That's what
And
I
then
wanted you
reference
to
could
tell
go
me.
back to the application.
Good answer. All right, can I have so this is we're discussing the waiver requests on page 5. We've got to act on that before we can move ahead. So anybody ready for a motion? Just to approve waiver requests?
I'll move that we approve the waiver requests as presented, located on page 5. There are several requests noted from number 4 through 16, 17, and 18.
I think that covers.
All inclusive.
Very good. I think that covers it. Thank you, Michael. Can I have a second?
Hold on. Can we exclude? Sorry, can we exclude point number 10? Because that was one of the conditions.
For handling.
Of approval.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Sorry.
You following that? Paul, there's a waiver request number 10. Said provisions for handling all solid waste, including hazardous and special waste. So we can't waive that. Yeah, good catch, Ashley.
There was something about sidewalks here too, I thought.
There was, but sidewalks, they're not proposing anything. This is at the back of the lot. So there was
Okay.
discussions about improving pedestrian
It's fine,
safety
yeah.
on a future project. We'll deal with that another day. So we have a motion, we have, well, we had a second.
I don't think we had a second yet because she
Okay,
made
there we
it.
go.
Yeah.
So
No.
how about a second for the amended waiver request?
Second.
Very good. Further discussion?
Excuse me, Phil, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just need to remind the board members, even when you're going back and forth like this, to make sure your microphones are on, because I'm not hearing the reverb that makes me think we're picking you up on the audio.
I haven't shut mine off,
Yeah,
so
mine's
I guess
on
I'm always on. Thank you for that reminder. Again, no discussion. All those in favor of the amended waiver request? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, those opposed, seeing none. We're good to go. Next up, proposed findings of fact. Again, these are for discussion. We're going to discuss each one of these individually. So proposed findings of fact for Bangor Natural Gas Site Plan Review dated July 19th, 2023. Pursuant to Article 6, Section 18-177 of the Orono Code of Ordinances, the Orono Planning Board has considered the application of Bangor Natural Gas for a minor site plan for the installation of a natural gas pressure regulation station, also referred to as an essential service building located at 19 College Ave, tax map 19-4 lot 67 in the medium density residential district, and based on all evidence presented by the applicant, reviewing agencies, town departments, and the public, found the following. Number one, requirements of the district that the proposed use is allowable in the medium density residential district and will conform to the zoning and dimensional requirements as set forth in the ordinance. Are there any issues with that? Seeing none. Number two, compliance with town ordinances and codes, that the proposed use meets the provisions of applicable regulations of the town, including all pertinent sections of Chapter 18 land use ordinance. Comments or questions on that one? Number three, utilization of the site, that the proposed project reflects the natural capabilities of the site and does not disturb any environmentally sensitive areas. We have heard discussion about, again, the wetness of the area. From a stormwater perspective, I think they've met the town's ordinance, and we talked about future discussion with the town. Given that, are there any issues with number three? Number four, traffic and pedestrian access, that the proposed use will only require occasional service vehicle visits and will not generate any public traffic. Therefore, no anticipated traffic impacts are anticipated. Are there any issues there? Number five, storage of materials, that the project does not propose any exposed storage of materials. Any comments on that one? Number six, stormwater management, that the development will maintain existing pre-development drainage patterns, and any additional runoff through the impervious area will not create adverse impacts on surrounding properties. I think we discussed this at length. Any issues remaining there? Number seven, erosion control, that erosion control measures will be implemented meeting the specifications contained in the Maine Department of Environmental Protection's Best Management Practices Manual. There's a whole section in the application regarding erosion control. Any issues with that? No. 8, water supply and sewage disposal, that no water supply and sewage disposal is required as part of the development. No issues there. Number 9, utilities, that the development is provided with electrical utility to adequately meet the proposed use. Any issues with that? And groundwater and surface water quality protection, that the proposed project does not adversely impact either the quality or quantity of groundwater available to abutting properties or to public water supply systems. We did have comments on this, again, based on what has been submitted by the applicant and their discussion. Are there any remaining issues with this one? Seeing none. 11, hazardous, special, and radioactive materials, that the proposed use of the site does not involve the handling, storage, or use of hazardous, special, or radioactive materials, and that if any contaminated soil is excavated during construction, it will be properly disposed of as a hazardous waste. As a reminder, I think we're going to have a little stronger condition of approval for this one. Are there any issues on that? Nope. 12, shoreline relationship, that this site is not within the shoreline zone. They did provide FEMA maps to show that. Any issues with that? 13, solid waste management, that the proposed use will not generate any solid waste. Any issues with that? 14, historic and archaeological resources, that the project area is not known to contain historic or archaeological resources. We are going to, as a condition of approval, we are awaiting letters from Fish and Wildlife. They're not archaeological, but we can lump it into this one. Any issues with that, as long as we have a condition of approval? All right, financial capacity, number 15, that the applicant has the financial capacity to carry out the use. Any issues there? Lastly, noise and lighting, that the development will comply with the sound level limits as set by Chapter 13 of the ordinance, and that the outdoor lighting will be directed towards or downwards to avoid impacts on surrounding properties. Again, talked about this at length. I believe the applicant has agreed to provide a simple lighting diagram showing that things are not impacting the property boundaries and the neighbors, and the noise was addressed. I think the applicant has heard the people that attended this meeting, that noise is an issue, and you're an essential service, but you're right next to a neighborhood. So please take that into account. Any further issues there? All right. Any further comments? All right, I do think we're ready for a motion, please.
Okay, I move that we approve the Bangor Natural Gas Site Plan Review that was submitted July 19th, 2023 for a natural gas pressure regulation center building located at 19 College Ave, tax map 19-4, lot 67 in the medium residential district with the following additions. That prior to issuance of a building permit, town staff and any relevant parties on behalf of the developer will hold a pre-construction meeting to discuss construction details, logistics, and establish points of contact, and include a hazardous waste removal plan that utilizes DEP expertise as needed. That the fish and wildlife responses are on file. That a lighting diagram to assess impact of the lighting on the neighborhood is included, and that there's an estimate of the decibel levels for the equipment included in the plan.
I think that covered it. Does that sound like we grabbed everything? All right, thank you. That was great. We have a motion. We have a second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Moving on, next up is discussion. Kyle, what do we have on tap?
Yeah, so it looks like we'll be having an August meeting. one of the remaining Grant Road lots is coming back. You know, as we've discussed previously, there's actually 2 lots being done at once this time. So that'll bring us nearly to the end of that process. And then the other project is, if you remember, Sargent Corporation came, their property on Godfrey Drive a while back. They were reducing the parking area. They ended up deciding to reduce some of the parking area, but not as much as they had initially planned. So they're coming back for an amendment to that this next month. I think they found or did a little more thinking on some occupants for the second floor and kind of changed their needs there. So those 2 things will be coming next month, both fairly small projects. And then just the other point of discussion that we just wanted to make you aware of. Remember, a while back, we had a cluster subdivision, small cluster subdivision on Stillwater Ave. It's like a 6-unit. Seems like there's been some impact there to some buffer and natural areas that most likely shouldn't have taken place. So code,
The other one I was gonna ask
Yeah.
about.
so code enforcement has been working with DEP and to kind of get that situation resolved. We just want to, let the board know that at some point in the coming months, or once there's a plan there, that could be coming back to the planning board, potentially to just, be an amendment to kind of whatever the plan of action that results from that process is. But that could be coming back at some point. Other than that, that's it.
So Nancy is here. Can you give us an update on the comprehensive plan? She was one of the diehards that stuck through the process, but
I was
had a
thinking,
lot to add, but just what's the latest? I
Yep.
can't remember the schedule. Yeah.
so new comp plan process will start late next spring, early summer will be the last one started 2 years before it was adopted eventually. That will be the 2-year mark before it really needs to be adopted again. Not everyone takes those full 2 years. So whether we start exactly in the late spring or early summer, or it's midsummer, I'm not sure exactly yet. But sometime within, around a year, we'll be looking to start the next comp plan process. So over the winter, I think we can expect more conversations at council level and looking into who's sitting in on comp plan committee and things like that, and starting to talk about, some initial just higher level picture ideas on what topics, we're looking to really explore and jump into, and
Heard a
starting
couple tonight.
starting to look at gathering data from the state and like some of that preliminary stuff to get out of the way. But yeah, it's coming up pretty soon.
There you go. While you're here. Very good. Any further discussion? All right, next up, adjournment. Can I get a motion?
So
Ooh,
second,
Further discussion? All those in favor? All those opposed?
I'm not even gonna count that one.
oh my goodness, it's approaching my bedtime.